pleasure to sit down with you, Lee, and talk about your book, which I thoroughly enjoyed reading. Can you say something about the subject of the book and why you wrote it?
So the subject of the book is really what it's like to be a young immigrant in the United States. And I wrote the book in order to give people who are immigrants and who are not immigrants a much better understanding that there are a lot of different borders that people experience when they're immigrants. There's the physical border, whether it's imaginary, real, but there's lots of borders through different institutions like education, labor, family relationships, all different kinds of borders. And young immigrants are a particularly vulnerable population that really, when we look at vulnerable populations, we actually have a better chance of understanding how society works and who it lets in and who it doesn't.
Now, your book is on a very serious topic. I think it's true to say that it's not the sort of book that will only end up on the bookshelves in a research library. I think that many of the general public will want to read it. For whom did you write the book specifically?
That's a great question. I had in my mind that I did not want the book to be contained within universities. I would love for people who are engaging in learning and thinking within universities, of course, to read the book. But I thought about my neighbor. How do I get my neighbor to think differently about immigration? I thought about family conversations at Thanksgiving. How do I get us to have a better conversation about immigration? So I wrote the book to try to increase that level of discourse, but still have it be accessible.
What's the best word to describe the teens in your book? I think it's true to say that you don't really like the word illegal. Would undocumented be a better word?
Many of the youth in the book are undocumented. I think it's a better word because it doesn't traffic in this mythology that a whole human being can be legal or illegal. Illegal is not a great word to use because it refers wholesale to people as either legitimate or illegitimate. But we don't refer to Martha Stewart, for example, as an illegal businesswoman. So it's really charged. It's doing political work when we say illegal. I do use the term undocumented, even though it doesn't. One of the collateral damages of using undocumented is it doesn't carry the quite violent force that many of the young people and adults experience when they are undocumented, that illegal in some fashion does seem to better suit, but it's not the best word. It's not the kindest word, it's not the most realistic word, it's certainly not the most humane word to use.
Would you like to talk specifically about some of the young people in your book and give some examples? And maybe talk about some of the borders other than the territorial ones that they have encountered and continue to encounter in society.
So one of the young people that readers meet first in the book is a young Haitian woman named Juana. And she's undocumented at the beginning of the book and very, very driven to be a nurse and is always the picture of thoughtfulness and how she's put together. She carries herself very deliberately with intention, and she's careful about what she does and says. She ends up marrying a U.S.-born white man and gets a green card in that way, or applies for a green card through that route. And it ends up being quite a bad situation for her. There's some domestic violence that goes on. He turns out to be quite an opportunistic person. But even though she was undocumented before she met him, when she marries him and is more legitimate, as seen through the eyes of the law, she's actually much more removed from her community, from an urban center when she goes and lives with him. And in that sense, her dreams of becoming a nurse were in some ways a little bit more tougher realized in that context because she wasn't spending time talking with people who were nurses. She was taking classes, but she was so pressed between work and the commute and getting home that these are the places where we don't often talk about borders, but it's how people built up their networks. And if there are implicit borders to that kind of connection building, it just don't get as far in society.
Presumably better schools in general would help these undocumented teens, but surely a better educational system really constitutes only the tip of the iceberg, and that real societal change must be effected in order to help them. Would you like to comment on that?
So the subtitle of the book includes the word education in it. And education is certainly a key focus of the book, but I wanted to illuminate how much, even if everything goes perfectly well in education. So you're a young immigrant, you come to the United States, you don't speak English fluently, you certainly don't speak academic English fluently, and you're taking courses in high school, you're having to learn about osmosis for the first time and learn about it in academic scientific English, write up lab reports in it. Let's say all of that goes really smoothly. You're some kind of a wonder kid who just picks it up like this. Even if you're getting a wonderful GPA, doing really well in your classes, in education we think that's it, like that's how we're going to level the playing field. But the fact is that education, like every other institution in society, is tied to every other institution. So when somebody has greater and worse access to society, to access to security in society, education is just one of the pieces that connects to the other pieces, like work, like family, like documentation status, like gender roles. All of those intertwine within the field of education and certainly outside of education.
Lee, clearly some schools are better than others in meeting the needs of these young people. What are some of the features, some of the practices of these better schools?
The features that really make a difference is when teachers and students are in relation to each other. The teachers know well the students know well and trust the teachers to share more of themselves with them. Our challenge right now in the field of education, it's been our challenge for a long time, but it feels particularly acute right now, is that's very hard to accomplish, particularly in secondary schools where there are large numbers of students, small numbers of teachers, a vast amount of curriculum to get through, and it's very high stakes that curriculum is covered for these assessments that the students have to take, and now increasingly are tied to teachers' pay. So all of these contextual factors get in the way of teachers and students knowing each other very well. For example, get in the way of a teacher maybe finding out if a student has documentation to be in the country or not, which is important for teachers and administrators to know, because we tend to talk a lot about, you'll need to know this when you go to college, and for college you'll need blah, blah, blah. Well, that isn't incredibly useful for students who don't have documentation. But if we don't know who those students are, our impact is really compromised.
You spent some years working with Franklin High School, a school that for some time was quite successful in meeting the needs of these teens. Would you like to say something about your experiences there?
Well, Franklin High School is, I hesitated a little bit to write about it in the book as expansively as I do, because I would not like it to be held up as a model of a school. And at the same time, it had many features in it that made it much more of a community than a school. All of that had its issues. You know, it had, like any community, there were conflicts, there were areas of disagreement. Not everybody was in the same mutual fan club with each other, and that's how it goes in communities. But for a while, that school had a very tight community where the teachers and the administrators did know the personal lives of the students, did know just who they were living with at home, for example, or if they were living by themselves and supporting themselves. And it had that feature for a while, in part because of the size and in part because of the backgrounds of the adults in the school that made it that much easier for them to know which questions to ask to their students.
You're clearly a little cynical, may I say, a little jaundiced about President Obama's 15th of June 2012 announcement that the government would stop deporting young undocumented immigrants who match certain criteria previously proposed under the DREAM Act. Would you like to elaborate on that?
That would be true to say. I like the word jaundiced. Yeah, I think I would like us, I was celebrating along with many undocumented youth the day that that announcement was made, and at the same time, as I was celebrating, it wasn't an unfettered celebration because it was such a well-orchestrated announcement. And by that indication alone, it was a political act and it was politically motivated. That doesn't mean that there's not good that will come out of it, but it means that we have to be diligent about how naively we see this as a wholesale act of good and a step in the right direction. We have to make sure to be asking, is this the ceiling of what we envision to be what is a humane way for the government to act for immigrant populations, or is it closer to the basement? And in my mind, much closer to the basement than it is to the ceiling.
Now, the most difficult question: what might the government do to improve the lot of these teens? What laws might be enacted?
I would really love to see policymakers, educators, U.S.-born and immigrant populations understand that immigration is not an individual act of just wanting the American dream, that this has to do with push and pull forces of capital across borders. So I think the government can do a much better job in thinking about the repercussions it has on low-income nations when we enact certain economic policies, and to understand immigrants wanting to cross borders into this nation is having everything to do with those kinds of policies.
Do you personally have hope that the needs of these undocumented teens will improve in the future, at least in the near future?
That's a great question. I'm optimistic, much more optimistic than I was a year ago, and it's mostly because of what I've seen young undocumented activists do. We've seen some amazing activism over the past year and very successful campaigns like Undocubus, which was a bus of dreamers, as they're referred to, young undocumented students who are advocating on behalf of the DREAM Act that would benefit them and allow them to attend higher education. Fantastic mobilization that hooked the social imagination by telling their stories, and then use that hook to show the injustice of these policies and that it's for the betterment of the country if they are allowed to fulfill this promise of the American dream that what we tout and hold up is what this nation is about. What they were able to accomplish, and that they actually got the ear of the public and got the ear of many policymakers, that alone makes me very optimistic. And now I see those activists talking about citizenship for all and not sacrificing, for example, parents who may have brought them across the border with them. So I see a lot of very well executed and thoughtful and passionate activism from young immigrants, and that's very edifying to me.
Lee, is there anything you'd like to add in conclusion?
I think the only other thing that I would add is that, the book is very much about undocumented youth. It's also about documented youth, and that documentation tends to be the one most visible and salient issue around which we talk about immigrant youth. Not in education, we tend to talk about them in terms of their language fluency, but it's one of the things that we really gravitate towards. But borders come up in all of our young people's lives, especially if they're low income and youth of color. They could have full documentation, they could have citizenship, and still encounter significant borders to achievement in this country. So one of the things that I wanted to show in the book is that documentation is huge, but it's certainly not the only thing. It's one of the many different borders that can make reality one of a series of open doors or a series of obstacles.